Meanwhile, Imran Khan has expressed grave concerns over COVID-19, saying that it can destroy and devastate economies of developing countries. He said the international community should be willing to waive off loans to these nations in case the situation worsens. In an interview, Khan said that he fears Pakistan will not be able to cope with a major outbreak, saying the country's health facilities would be overwhelmed and would lack resources.
Clearly, our health facilities, in case we get swamped by it, our health facilities will not be able to cope. And it's not just Pakistan. I would imagine the same in India, in the subcontinent, in African countries. You know, if it spreads, we will all have problems with our health facilities, which we just don't have that much capability. We just don't have the resources.
Expressing concerns over severe economic fallout of the outbreak, the leader said that if a serious outbreak happens in the country, the government's efforts to lift the economy out of near collapse would begin an unstoppable slide backward.
Because of the effects of the economic slowdown, they are likely, we are going to, my worry is poverty and hunger. That worries me much more right now. For that, I think, the world community has to think of some sort of a debt write-off for countries like us, which are very vulnerable. At least that will help us in coping with it.
Not just that, he also called for an end to sanctions on Iran, saying that they were crippling the nation's ability to contain the spread of the disease. So far, over 14,900 Iranians have tested positive and 853 have lost their lives. Most of Pakistan's 120 confirmed cases of COVID-19 have been traced back to Iran, and all of the 21 Afghans who tested positive had traveled to Iran.
I actually fear for what is happening in Iran too, because of the sanctions. Because the sanctions already have, impoverished Iran. On top of it, this virus. So that should be a classic example of a place where at least now sanctions should be lifted, because they are in a terrible state right now.
The pandemic presents one of the biggest tests yet of Imran Khan's leadership since he took office in 2018. A full-blown health crisis will severely worsen the situation in the country, which is already struggling on multiple fronts.
More borders are being closed. The world is trying to seal itself off away from the coronavirus. Where are we on this Monday? Well, let's pull in a man who is known as the voice of reason and the voice of calm in all of this. John Campbell is a British physician, and he has been educating the public about the outbreak on his YouTube channel. Dr. Campbell, it's good to have you back on the day. Would you agree that here in Europe and in North America, we are now entering what will be the worst phase of this pandemic?
Well, no, I'm afraid not. I think we're still in the relatively early stages, because we can expect the number of cases to carry on increasing for some time at the moment. So the number of cases in Germany at the moment is underreported, as it is in all European countries, because we're not testing everyone. So my government has estimated that there's actually 10 times to 20 times more actual cases than the testing would indicate. But Chancellor Merkel, for example, has estimated that this could affect 70% of the German population. So we are nowhere near that yet. So I'm afraid we're going to see a continuation of increasing numbers of cases. And the French authorities have estimated that the doubling time at the moment in France is every 3 days, which is quite a horrendous rate of increase for the number of cases, unfortunately. And that's probably going to go on increasing. What we need to do now is slow down the rate of increase. We absolutely have to slow down the rate, because it's increasing too quickly at the moment. And this means that soon we're going to be overwhelmed and health services are going to be overwhelmed. I'm delighted that the German hospitals are coping at the moment, but if we've got doubling numbers every 3 or 4 days, then that's only going to be a matter of time till they are severely challenged. And we need to delay that as long as we can and reduce those numbers as much as we possibly can.
Dr. Kimball, if I could, I want you to take a listen to what the head of the WHO said today about the outbreak.
We have a simple message for all countries: test, test, test. Test every suspected case. If they test positive, isolate them and find out who they have been in close contact with up to 2 days before they developed symptoms, and test those people too.
Dr. Kimball, there are still significant supply problems with tests in the United States. I'm wondering, at this stage, how valuable are these tests? I mean, should we still be trying to test everybody?
There's very much two views on that, Brent. There's the view taken by the World Health Organization, which says testing is absolutely essential. And there's the view taken by my government, which says that testing is less essential. And my government are actually reserving testing now for people that are clinically ill, if it will inform the clinical decision making. But I think a lot of this rationale that's given for the lack of testing in my country and in the United States is actually driven by a lack of the number of tests. So, for example, in the United States, rather than adopt the World Health Organization standard test, at the start of this pandemic, the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, decided to produce their own test. And there was great delays in that, so that resulted in much reduced testing. And in the meantime, there was community spread within the United States. Whereas the World Health Organization position on this, where they say test, 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 is based on the Chinese experience and on the South Korean experience, and to some degree on the Singaporean and Hong Kong experience, where there was extensive testing and every case was isolated, every case was diagnosed, because the World Health Organization is saying that we can't fight a virus that we can't see. And the only way we can see this virus is with testing. So we have to take really quite extreme measures, in my view, to coincide with the World Health Organization's guiding on this and try and increase testing as much as we can. Now, fairly soon, there should be an antibody test. So the tests at the moment are what we call the antigen tests. They're actually testing for the presence of the virus itself. But soon we'll have testing for antibodies, which are the immune response that the human body makes in response to the virus, in response to the antigen. And that will not tell us who has the infection acutely necessarily, but it will tell us who has had the infection in the past. And that will give us a lot more information. It will also tell us who's got the infection after probably a delay of about 3 or 4 days, depending on the sensitivity of the test. So I really feel providing more testing is a priority just now.
Yeah, and we go from testing to vaccines. In Seattle, in the United States, we understand that the first trials, human trials for a coronavirus vaccine have begun. I mean, that seems very fast. What do you think about that?
It's remarkably fast. It's really incredibly fast, the progress that's been made. There's lots of candidate vaccines at the moment, and they're on stage 1 clinical trials. Now, that means they've already done some animal toxicology testing, and that presumably has passed that to go into the phase 1 human trials. So phase 1 human trials is going to be with healthy volunteers, basically to check for the safety of the vaccine. And then they'll have to test on larger numbers of human volunteers to test for the efficacy of the vaccine, to make sure the vaccine is producing antibodies, to make sure it's confirming immunity, and to make sure the vaccine is safe, because of course vaccines, they're biological substances and they have the potential to do significant harm. So there's still a long way to go yet, and basically we're not going to have a vaccine available for me to inject into people's arms in 2020. It's going to be 2021 before we have it.
Here in Germany, there are reports that U.S. President Trump tried to purchase a German research lab by the name of CureVac, which is working on a coronavirus vaccine. I want you to take a listen to what CureVac's co-founder said earlier this month about what they're doing. Take a listen.
We are seeing a lot of political support, and the issue is being taken very seriously from all sides. Specifically, we've received support from an international vaccine initiative so that these clinical trials can also begin here. we now have a platform process where we can quickly respond to new threats. So we believe that this RNA technology is a very good way to rapidly provide solutions.
So that's what they're doing. Now, CureVac today has rejected all reports that it was or is up for sale, but it did not deny that it may have been in talks with the U.S. president. So, Dr. Campbell, I want to ask you, as a medical professional, do you consider political leaders wheeling and dealing in the middle of a pandemic? Is that a contribution to helping and healing the infirmed?
Well, I don't know if that's the case, but if it is the case, then patently it is not. This is a time for all people to work together, and the World Health Organization have stressed this. We really need to share information. We need to share data and move forward as one human race. I do hope there's no wheeling and dealing going on behind the scenes. If there was, I'd be remarkably disappointed, but I simply can't comment whether that's the case or not. But there are a lot of vaccine candidates because people have taken different parts of the virus and are trying to make vaccines from different antigenic components of the virus that the immune system can learn to recognize. So there's quite a few candidate vaccines going around, maybe 20 or more, that are serious contenders for vaccines at the moment. And I would hope that 4 or 5 of those may result in clinically successful vaccines. But we really need to collaborate together on this. It's not about money. There's a lot of human lives at stake here. There's no higher stakes than this.
And you know, we are looking at possibly 2-3 months, maybe even longer, of this social distancing. I mean, this is tough on everybody, especially on the elderly. And we've got reports now that loneliness has become an epidemic itself. I mean, that is an unintended consequence, you could say, of the coronavirus. How should we address that?
Yeah, I don't really see any alternative to what we're doing now. We have to have the social isolation because we have no antiviral drugs and we have no vaccines that are proven to be effective against this virus. So I don't think there's any real alternative. But we have to realize that human beings, of course, are holistic. We are mind, body, spirit, and our social interactions. And we can't ignore the mind on this. There's a lot of anxiety. That's giving rise to a lot of stress. And a lot of people are suffering as a result of this social isolation. Older people and people with chronic conditions were probably socially isolated already. This is actually making that a lot worse. So this is really a time for people to step up to the mark and go and see the older person in your housing block. Talk to the person who's got a long chronic sick condition who's just down the street from you. Come together as communities, join community health groups, do things that are practically going to help. Now, we can't go around for a cup of tea, we can't go around and give them a hug at the moment, but we can certainly talk on social media, we can certainly talk on the phone, and we can even talk through closed windows as long as they can see someone else if they're not in direct contact. And this social contact, this social closeness that we can't have physically, but we can have it through medium, through glass and through electronic devices, is absolutely important, absolutely critical. We really need to move together as a community and bear in mind that we are mind, body, spirit, and our social interactions, and really go forward with that, helping people around us and reaching out to people around about us that we normally might not reach out to.
Good words of advice there. Dr. John Campbell joining us tonight with valuable insights as we progress further into this pandemic. Dr. Campbell, thank you.
We've done an experiment, just 10 minutes a day, 3 times a day with 120 people, trading resentment, frustration, fear for gratitude, appreciation, and thankfulness. Measuring their immune response, the chemical immunoglobulin A, your primary defense against bacteria and viruses, the best flu shot you'll ever get, lives innately within you. Turns out when you're frustrated, when you're impatient, when you're fearful, the immune system dials down because you're an emergency. It's not, all your energy is going for some threat in your outer world. There's no energy in your inner world for growth and repair. But how do you turn that around? So then, as people begin to open their heart, can that chemical begin to elevate? 4 days, 50% change in the 120 people. Their IgA levels went up 50% in 4 days. That's your body's immune system is now upregulating genes that are making proteins and immunoglobulins and antibodies that you don't need a flu shot. In other words, your inner state is greater than your outer world. So then just by doing that, we now know that your immune system is going to get stronger. By the same means, take 120 people or 50 people and measure 7,500 gene regulations. Okay? In 4 days, 2 genes that suppress cancer growth and tumors are activated and upregulated. The genes that stimulate stem cells to go to damaged tissues and repair them, upregulated. The gene for oxidative balance is upregulated. Anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-neurodegenerative, anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial. Just the body's naturally doing this. The gene for neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in response to novel experiences and learning. This is 4 days. The gene switches on. The gene for more balance in the pituitary and the pancreas. The gene for the microtubules of the cells, the little fibers that respond to energy and frequency. So in 4 days, we now know that you can change your genetic destiny if you just practice the inner work. We have research to show that 60 days of meditation, 5 days a week, will lengthen your life. The telomeres, the little shoestrings on the end of your DNA, get longer. That means your biological age is changing. So we have the evidence now to show people what's possible. We have brain scans that are so outside of normal that when neuroscientists see them, they're blown away, because the amount of energy that's in the brain during this transcendental moment is hundreds of times outside of normal. Wow. I mean, you can't make your brain do that. Something is happening to you, and that person's having a transcendental moment. And we now know that we can predict it, and we now know that we can induce it.
Well, I think in order for us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I got the call. I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California. I was in the biking portion of the race and was negotiating a turn, and the police officer that was helping me to make the turn had his back to the oncoming traffic. So the moment I made the turn, this four-wheel drive Bronco going 55 miles an hour just clipped me from behind, and I landed pretty squarely on the ground and ultimately wound up breaking 6 vertebrae in my spine, some bone fragments on the spinal cord, and it had created some neurological problems for me. And the conventional treatment for that is a Harrington rod surgery, where they cut the back parts of your vertebrae off and then they screw in these long stainless steel rods. And
that's not just one surgery, that's multiple, isn't it?
Well, it could be multiple, but the purpose of the Harrington rods is to pull the spine back, the spinal column off the spinal cord, and to stabilize it. And it sounded like a good idea for any patient that I see with that condition. I would recommend the surgery, but this was me, and it wasn't so quick to just rush into it. So after 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, I really had to make a significant decision. Do I weigh my old beliefs against a new paradigm and jump off into the unknown and try something new? If there's an intelligence that's giving us life, could I make contact with it? Could I give it a specific plan, instructions, a template, and then surrender it to a greater mind and allow it to do the healing for me? Or do I stick with the conventional model and, take the safe route and possibly have a handicap and live on addictive medications the rest of my life? So I decided to go from a philosophical realm and to initiate that to try to create a new experience. But I mean, really, upon reflection, it's really just 2 models. There's a mechanistic model of reality where when things break, you fix them. But then there's also a vitalistic model of reality that transcends materialism. And that vitalistic model says that there's energy, there's information, there's an intelligence that's organizing trillions of functions per second in every cell of your body, and if that intelligence is a consciousness and an awareness, then maybe you can become present with it enough to begin to give it some instructions. And so I thought, hell, I might as well take a chance. I can't heal my back, but a greater mind can do it for me. So I thought, if my will matches its will, if my mind matches its mind, and if my love for life matches its love for life, it should answer the call. So I wanted to develop a relationship with it and give it really specific instructions. And if I lost my focus, or if I lost my attention, I would stop and start all over again. And that's really when I started to learn about the mind and the brain, because I realized how unfocused I was, number one. And number two, when we're in crisis or trauma, we wind up focusing on what we don't want instead of what we do want. So turning that battleship around was my dark night of the soul. And
huge. Yes.
I think after about 6 weeks, though, I started noticing some very significant changes. That was the moment when I started noticing those changes, that what I was doing was making a difference. And then I started doing it with more passion. I thought this idea that the power that made the body heals the body. I mean, I believe that to this day, and I believe that the quantum model of reality explains healing better than anything. I mean, you can't explain how even a cut heals without bringing in the quantum model. I mean, you can talk about molecules and circuits and chemicals and attractions and repulsions, but that's really not how it works. I mean, that's a model that's very limited. So I said, if the power that made the body heals the body, and this consciousness is an awareness, and awareness is paying attention, then I have to be completely present with it. Just like when you're with your daughter and she's with you, she knows when you're present with her and when you're not, and you know when she's present with you and when you're not. Right. And this intelligence requires our presence, which means your mind can't wander to the future, to the past, and to extraneous information. You have to be completely present, and I wanted to create a very specific instruction. I wanted to reconstruct every single one of my vertebrae, step by step, from start to stop, and repair every single one of those areas that I knew from the scans. And if I lost my focus, because I wasn't present, I was thinking about living in a wheelchair, if I should sell my home or my practice, then I lost my focus. I wasn't creating a clear signal. I would stop, and I would start all over again. Now here's the problem. I would start getting frustrated that I lost my focus, and then when I got emotional, I got frustrated, then I got more unfocused. And so after a couple weeks, I started figuring out that instead of reacting, just to keep bringing it back, and I was increasing my attention span during that time. And then once I was able to complete a very clear picture, it would take me 2 or 3, sometimes longer, just 3 hours immersed in the inner world, but I was wiring new circuits over time every single day, and it started getting easier, because as nerve cells wire together, you start constructing physical changes in the brain. Those changes then you can reactivate the next day, and they should be easier to select. So it started getting easier for me, and I started to be able to do it in shorter and shorter amount of time. And when I really got through it the first time from start to finish without losing my focus, it was like I hit a tennis ball in the sweet spot. Something clicked, and when I knew that, I knew that something happened, and that's when I started feeling all the changes in my body, my pain, all the sensations changing, and that's when I knew that if I was making those changes outside of me, I should pay attention to what I was doing inside of me and do it with more conviction, with more intensity. The quantum field is the space between the atoms inside the neurons, and at the same time the field energetically around them. So learning is making new synaptic connections. Every time you learn something new, there is a physical change that takes place in your brain. The brain upscales its hardware. So if you learn something in this show, or you learn something in reading a book, and you learn something on a documentary, you have a footprint of consciousness left in your brain. So consciousness then has to leave material evidence of what we've learned biologically. And so if learning is making new synaptic connections, then remembering is maintaining and sustaining them. So how do two neurons know how to reach across a bridge and connect? Because not only is there genetic changes taking place where those genes are creating proteins in a moment-by-moment state where a branch can grow that quickly and connect. When you see these pictures, that's a gene being switched on to do that, and the gene switches on, and then there's a physical change. But how do those two neurons know how to bridge and connect? That's the field of information in consciousness that they're sharing. And it's that consciousness and the energy that's supporting it that allows that information to connect. So then you think you're this, we think we're a physical body, but we're the field around the body, using this body as a puppet. So when you begin to become aware that you are a consciousness, then when consciousness begins to learn from something in its environment, the biology has to change. But it's that field around you, consciousness, that's constructing that change biologically. So consciousness then causes the circuits to connect. Knowledge is the precursor to experience. The more knowledge you have, the more prepared you are for an experience. So you have 3 brains that allow you to go from thinking to doing to being. When you learn information, you store it in your analytical philosophical, theoretical thinking neocortex. That's the home of the you and the me. That's that walnut on the outside. And so if you're learning how to heal yourself, or you're learning about quantum physics, and you're learning about neuroscience, or you're learning about love, or forgiveness and letting go, as you're reading the book, your brain is physically changing, right? And if you review it and you think about it, the contemplation process begins to seal the connections. So then your learning is the first step. Now, when you take that philosophical information and you initiate it, you apply it, you personalize it, you demonstrate it. Now you have to modify your behaviors in some way and do something differently. Well, if you change your actions, and then the new experience then is created. Experience then enriches the brain neurologically. Now you begin to add more connections to the semantic information that you learned, and now there's more circuits in place that's mapping the experience through your senses. Then there's an emotional component that's created from the limbic brain, the second brain. Then all of a sudden, if you get your behaviors to match your intentions, or your actions equal to your thoughts, then you should have a new experience, and you should create a new emotion, and you should feel successful. You should feel like a patient parent. You should feel in love with life. You should feel like a great leader. And the moment you feel that emotion, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind is intellectually understood. So knowledge is for the mind, and experience is for the body. And we could say in that moment, you're embodying knowledge, and you're literally signaling new genes in new ways, and you're beginning to change the expression, not only in the brain, but as well in the body. Now, the new experience means that you have a neurochemical change taking place where mind and body are aligned, but really the mastery of that philosophical information after you initiate it is the repetition of it, to be able to reproduce the experience at will. And if you can do it enough times, then you begin to create networks of neurons that you can activate on command, and you can bring up the emotion from the experience. And when you go how you think and how you feel working together, when you align them, that's called a state of being, and you activate the third brain called the cerebellum. That's where all those implicit automatic skills and habits exist. So then now you are compassionate, now you are a leader, now you are patient, because you have neurochemically conditioned your body to become the mind of compassion, or we could say mind and body are aligned. So it's an evolution, Lisa, of those three steps. And so when you learn that information, that's the connection in the brain. And the research shows that if you learn just a bit of information, you can upscale the connections in your brain from about 1,300 connections to 2,600 connections. That's just learning a few bits of information. If you don't revisit that information, those connections wither apart in a matter of hours.
Go away.
So we have to continuously review and remind.